This November, California voters will decide on a new minimum wage increase. The proposal is Prop 32, and it's one of the 10 ballot measures up for a vote. If passed, this will raise the current minimum wage from $16 an hour to $18 an hour.
1 in 3 Californians lives and works in poverty. The cheapest county in the state of California is Modoc County. In Modoc County, one person with no children needs over $20 an hour just to cover the very basics: rent, food, transportation.
To understand the impact of Prop 32 on minimum wage workers in California, we sit down with Saru Jayaraman, president of One Fair Wage, a leading advocacy group for service workers, and the director of the Food Labor Research Center at UC Berkeley. We also sit down with John Kabateck, California State Director of NFIB, which represents 14,000 small businesses in the state. He'll share his concerns about the impact of Prop 32.
Just since the minimum wage increase again that went into effect for fast food employees, we have seen since April here in California, 98% of them have had to raise prices. 89% of them have had to scale back hours or benefits for their workers, and 70% of them have had to make cuts. Who doesn't want a few extra dollars in their pocket, right? But we ask, with the minimum wage increase, at what cost? At what price?
Today, we'll look into what Prop 32 means for Californians. Stick around until the end to hear perspectives from both sides. I'm Siam Akorami. Welcome to California Insider. John, it's great to have you on back. Welcome back.
Always great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We want to talk to you about a ballot proposition on minimum wage. Already there's a lot of discussions about this, and California wants to increase the minimum wage in California to $18 from $16.50, what it is now.
Right.
And you're against this ballot proposition. Can you tell us what's going on with this ballot proposition?
Absolutely. Well, California, to put things into perspective, California already has the second highest minimum wage in the country, second only to Washington State. We are currently at $16 an hour. But what we're finding from small business owners that we talk to just within our organization, the National Federation of Independent Business, our 14,000 members, they are still trying to crawl out of that COVID hole. And so they're very concerned about an unexpected cost like this that can hit their small business. And ultimately, it has a real negative impact on the people who they employ, who are now going to see reduced shifts and jobs altogether. So we balloted our members, and 92.65% of our responding NFIB members said, this is the wrong idea. Do we want to help small businesses and do we want to help employees? Always. But is a man-made, one-size-fits-all wage the solution? Absolutely not. And we're seeing that already in California.
Can you tell us more? So what do you think will be the impact?
Yeah, it's interesting. We always used to look to other states and other cities across the nation for these examples of a minimum wage increase. But in recent years, even in recent months, we only need to look in our own backyard here in California to see the impact this has been having of a fabricated, one-size-fits-all wage. The minimum wage increase in the fast food industry, which I'm happy to discuss further with you, is having a very negative effect on both price increases and job loss. But we've also seen it in other facilities like healthcare and just in other communities. We're seeing small business owners shutting their doors. We're already seeing that in the fast food industry, that increased the minimum wage to $20 an hour for fast food franchises across the state. That went into effect in April. And what we have seen just in the past 3 to 4 months, jobs that have been lost, we've seen an average of about 8% increase in prices in businesses. And what we're also seeing is a really disturbing trend of businesses now shifting to robotics and kiosks. I think you've probably been to a few establishments, I know I have, where it's almost like the Terminator era, right? And I did work for Schwarzenegger, so I can use that comment, right? But it's sad because we're seeing a lot of opportunities that young people would be looking forward to as that first experience that are now dissolving. And we're seeing that just in the fast food industry alone. This measure goes into effect, Proposition 32. We'll see that across a wide swath of businesses across the state.
So what kind of businesses are tied into this minimum wage? And it's like some people might argue that how many people are in this category and why can't the businesses give them a raise?
You know, who doesn't want a few extra dollars in their pocket, right? Who doesn't want a few extra dollars when it goes to the workplace? But we ask with a minimum wage increase, at what cost? At what price is that going to be in the long term? To answer your question, I think what we find is we find minimum wage increases happening in certainly restaurants, certainly retail, hospitality, and travel-related industries. And I think, you know, we have a member, for example, up in Redding, California, who owns a physical fitness gym. And he was talking about the impact it would have on his gym and with these minimum wage employees who work there. As this goes into effect, should it go into effect, he's going to have to do a combination of both raising his monthly fees, but more likely scale back shifts, scale back jobs, and in many ways may have to consider shutting his doors. So it's businesses like that that really are reliant on a quality young troop of workers, but with this kind of an increase, it's just going to be more difficult.
Does that impact the managers too, or is it just this layer of people?
It's interesting you mentioned that. You know, an economist by the name of Chris Thornburg with Beacon Economics. And I remember him using a term, and that term was compaction. And what compaction is kind of a negative effect of a rising tide. So when a minimum wage employee, an entry-level employee gets a minimum wage increase, such as we could see through Prop 32, not only is he getting that increase, but now you're seeing an assistant manager in the business seeing his wages, you know, now needing to be raised. And that assistant manager going to the boss saying, look, Susie and Ken just got a minimum wage increase. I'm now deserving of an increase as an assistant manager. And then it goes so on and so on. We have a general manager who now demands an increase, regional managers. And so you put a small business owner in a very difficult position, and that, to answer your question, is a very ill effect of kind of this cookie cutter wage that is imposed on all businesses. But the ill effects is now there's pressure to raise the wages of all the others, whether they deserve that increase or not.
Now, what about some people say that the cost of living is so high in California, and this kind of minimum wage, people cannot survive on that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, it's important to point out that about 1.4% of all hourly workers are minimum wage workers in California and the nation, which is startling. You'd think it would be much more, but it really is a small, small number. And then in addition to that, we find that about 63% of those who are minimum wage employees are ones who are earning just slightly below $9.50 an hour. But that 63% are those who would live within their household. Majority of them are not the ones that are kind of providing for their family. So what you often hear minimum wage proponents say is there's a lot of people out there who need a minimum wage increase. It's a small number who are minimum wage employees. And then to think that these people need to be lifted out of poverty or that these are the ones that are providing for their family, no, they're one of about 3 or 4 on average living in the household, and they're usually teenagers living with their parents. So when we hear that how can a person survive on a minimum wage, there's a number of reasons that kind of completely counter that.
You mentioned 2 things. Hours may get cut or prices may go up. Which one do you think will happen?
I think we're going to see a combination of those. In fact, what we have found just since the minimum wage increase again that went into effect for fast food employees, we have seen since April here in California, about 98% have had to raise prices. 89% of them have had to scale back hours or benefits for their workers, and 70% of them have had to make cuts. We see this impact, and it's not healthy, but many are having to make a decision of doing both, and it's hard for them.
And is these numbers from your surveys in your members?
These are not from ours. These are actually numbers that we have that have been from outside studies, but very credible sources.
So some people may say, okay, fine, why don't you cut some positions? It's better to have less of these minimum wage jobs, or raise your prices to pay people more, take care of your employees. What are your thoughts on that?
There's going to be a fallout. You know, and we witness fallouts like this when this is happening. So you certainly scale back workers in the workplace, and you do shift to robotics. Many people get frustrated with having to use technology, especially seniors, but anybody of any age can sometimes find that the case. They like that human contact. You know, small business owners really take pride in the fact that people walk into their store and they can do like we're doing right now, right? That face-to-face, that communication. They like that warm touch in their own neighborhood. That's what makes a small business so special.
In terms of taking care of employees, what do you think is the responsibility for the business owners?
I believe that it is every employer's responsibility, whether it's here in California or across the nation or globally, to demonstrate to their employees that there is a pathway to economic success and security, but also with growth and professional experience. So that is a very important discussion, and that's a discussion I don't think our policymakers have had enough of, is how we can make and create a better pathway.
So in the case of the gym you mentioned, can he just raise his prices? Because everybody else probably has to raise their prices, right?
Sure. Well, he can, and he probably will have to raise his prices. But again, as I say, at what cost? Will that mean that instead of 100 customers coming through the door a day, will it now be 40 or 45? And at what cost does that have on the very minimum waged employees who rely on those customers coming through the door to actually pay their salaries and their wages? And many of those customers, by the way, could very well be minimum waged employees themselves. One of the things that we found is many of the patrons of minimum wage establishments are minimum wage employees and their families. So sure, you put a few extra bucks in their pocket, but they patronize those stores, those restaurants, those fast food enterprises, and end up paying more and higher prices. The very minimum wage employees are usually the ones, majority of the time, that are paying more.
We're covering California issues, as you know. If you want us to cover the stories that are impacting your day-to-day life in California, reach out to me at siamak@californiainsider.com. So from what it looks like, this ballot proposition, was it proposed by a group of philanthropists, right?
Yeah, there's an investor named Mr. Sandberg who has proposed this measure up to $18 an hour. He has attempted this in the past, and yet you would think a multimillionaire investor who would understand economics in California would appreciate the impact it has on small businesses.
The proponents of this ballot proposition say that the minimum wage increase hasn't kept up with inflation. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it has. And in fact, in California, it's well surpassed inflation. And it's important to remember many small businesses pay well north of minimum wage to attract and retain workers. But as we discussed before, even with inflation, a small business owner that's facing a minimum wage increase in their neighborhood, maybe not even affecting their business, is now going to have to compete with those businesses surrounding them to try and keep and recruit employees. So we think that's a farce. We don't buy that that argument very well.
There's always another side to these ballot measures. To understand what the proponents are arguing and why they are putting Prop 32 on the ballot, we sit down with Saru Jayaraman, who's an advocate for this. Saru, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We want to talk to you about the ballot initiative, Ballot 32. You are someone that's for this initiative. Can you tell us more about this initiative?
Yeah, actually, it'll increase the wage that's currently $16.50 to $18 an hour for everybody in the state. California is the absolute most expensive state. The MIT Living Wage Calculator lets us know for every county, every state in the United States, the minimum you need to live, the minimum you need to cover the basics, rent, transportation, and food in your locality, in your county. The cheapest county in the state of California is Modoc County, way up by Mount Shasta in Northern California. In Modoc County, one person in the MIT Living Wage Calculator, one person with no children needs over $20 an hour just to cover the very basics: rent, food, transportation, just the basics. If you have one child in a two-parent, two-child household or a two-parent, one-child household, you actually need more than $30 an hour in Modoc County. That's the cheapest county in California. If you look at a place like San Francisco or Los Angeles, you need more like $28 or $30 an hour, even with no children as a single person, to cover just the basic cost of survival. It is a very expensive state, and the cost of living post-pandemic has wildly outpaced where wages are today.
And you mentioned that you need over $30 an hour for if you have kids. Is it the couple, each one of them needs $30 an hour, over
That's
$30 an
right.
hour?
So the MIT Living Wage Calculator calculates how much one person would need if they're single, if they're in a single parent situation, or if they are one person in a two earner household, two parents who are earning and have a child. So even with two parents earning, each child in Modoc County, the cheapest county in California, needs over $30 an hour just to cover the basics. This is not taking your children to Disneyland or covering major medical debt or even buying Christmas gifts.
And have you guys done any studies of what are people earning now on average in those places? Like, is there a big gap between what people need?
Yeah, median wages are low in Modoc County, but it's not really about median wages. We do have to worry about the lowest income earners. 1 in 3 Californians lives and works in poverty. And that's what we need to worry about because people who are in those low income categories are working in restaurants and retail environments, childcare environments. We've seen tremendous staffing crises in these low wage sectors because workers just can't afford to work in these jobs anymore. So they are either leaving the state or leaving these industries. And so it's not really, to me, it's not the median wage we should be looking at, it's the minimum wage. What is the lowest earner in any county in California earning? Because that's a huge population of folks who are struggling. We need to ensure the least anybody is earning in any of these counties is closer to the cost of living. $18, this proposition on the ballot in November, it's not everything that people need, but it's a good first step towards what people really need, which in Modoc County, even without a kid, as I mentioned, over $20 an hour.
And you mentioned a third of Californians live in poverty. Before, back in the day when we were here, these numbers, it would be a fifth of them, a sixth of them. Is this because of the pandemic?
Absolutely. And although it's maybe eased off a little bit, it has not come back down to pre-pandemic levels. And for working people, for minimum wage earners, it never stopped being a hair on fire crisis. It never stopped being unlivable, unbearable. Now, let me say, it is not just a post-pandemic phenomenon because the cost of living was outpacing wages for many decades. In fact, if the minimum wage had risen with inflation over the last many decades, it would be closer to $30 an hour today. It has not. While the cost of everything else has gone up, wages have been artificially suppressed by large corporations and corporate lobbies who, frankly, just don't want to pay their people enough. And post pandemic, what really happened was that cost of living skyrocketed so much it became unbearable, and workers started to leave the industry en masse. 1.2 million workers left the restaurant industry, and 80% said it was due to low wages. What does that do for California? Not only do these workers leave and go to other industries, it means there are not enough people left to serve us. Restaurants that used to be 24 hours can no longer be 24 hours because they don't have workers willing to work all the shifts. They don't have enough people willing to work for these wages. So we've seen a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses, already voluntarily raising wages in order to recruit and retain talented staff. What we need is policy like this ballot measure that will create a level playing field, a floor, so that those small businesses that have already raised wages 18 and above are not at a disadvantage to large corporations that just don't want to pay people enough.
Now, in your studies, have you analyzed whether the cost of housing, because some people that have owned their housing may not need as much versus people that don't own their housings, people that have bought their housing a few years ago and they had the fixed mortgage. Have you done any studies on that? Is that a big factor?
Minimum wage earners are quite often renters. They're quite often not homeowners. I mean, they haven't earned enough to be able to own a home. And unless you are privileged enough to have family give you a home from previous generations or to live with your parents, most minimum wage earners cannot afford their own homes. And so most folks are dealing with the skyrocketing cost of rent. afford to live anywhere near where the jobs are. I've been organizing restaurant workers for 22 years. I have never seen such a high percentage of workers in our industry working full-time or maybe even multiple jobs and living in their cars. I live in the Bay Area. I know workers who, in order to work in a restaurant in San Francisco where nobody can afford to actually rent anything, they live an hour and a half, 2 hours away in Tracy or Stockton even, and they go there for the weekends. They live in their car during the week to work in the restaurant. And I've seen this in LA as well. In Los Angeles, we're seeing workers who, rather than taking 2 and 3 hour bus commutes, they are living in cars closer to the restaurant and then commuting home maybe once a week. It means that a lot of minimum wage workers don't have enough to raise a family or the time and capacity to see their family. That has impacts on children's health, children's education, children's well-being, family well-being. It even has an impact on whether these workers decide to ever have children. And we're seeing an increasing statistics that are really heartbreaking, an increasing number of minimum wage workers who just never are able to afford to have a family into their 30s, 40s, 50s. They're living as single adults because they just can't afford to live on their own or to ever have a family.
Now, if this minimum wage ballot initiative goes through and now it's $18, do you think it's going to have an impact for the people that you are advocating for?
It will have an initial impact because there are people earning $16.50 or some illegally earning less. Some employers engage in what we call wage theft, paying workers less than the minimum wage. It will have an impact for those workers to go from a lesser wage to 18. But even for workers who are at 18 and a little bit above, what we see when the minimum wage goes up is that the workers just above the minimum wage also get a bump. We see a trickle up effect where workers at the bottom earn a little bit more, workers just above earn a little bit more than that. And all of these workers are doing, guess what? Spending. They are eating out. They are taking their families they can finally afford to consume goods, eat out, which does nothing but help the economy. It's why so many small businesses have joined forces with us to say, absolutely, we need to raise the wage because we need people in our communities to earn enough to be able to come eat in our restaurants and buy goods in our businesses.
Now, some people say that people that are getting minimum wage, this is the starter job. And the kids that are out of high school or they're about to go to college, they get these kind of jobs. And then from there, they move on to other jobs. And raising the minimum wage could cause these jobs to get cut. What are your thoughts on that?
The median age in California and across the country for minimum wage workers is in the mid-30s. Most of these workers are adults and they take great pride in what they do. They're not trying to move on to a different industry. Let's take the restaurant industry, for example. Restaurant workers are skilled professionals. If they weren't skilled professionals, then we would not go eat out. I'm sure you eat out. I eat out. We go to a restaurant for what? To benefit from the skills and talent of excellent cooks and servers who prepare an excellent meal and give us an excellent dining experience. In Europe, hospitality professionals go to school for many years to be a hospitality professional, and they earn professional wages and incomes. It is not that these aren't skilled jobs. It is not that they don't provide value that, frankly, we all seek out every time we eat out. The reason these wages are so artificially suppressed. They're suppressed not because these aren't skilled professions, not because these workers don't have talent that we all want every time we eat out, but simply because of a political process that has allowed corporations to dominate, and the wages as a result are so far from where they would have been had they risen like every other price. Every other price in our economy has continued to go up. The only price that hasn't gone up is the price of humans who, frankly, are providing us with a very skilled professional value that we benefit from every time we eat out.
Do you have any other thoughts for our audience?
Yeah. In 2021, the CFO of Denny's was caught red-handed telling shareholders that actually raising the minimum wage would be fine for the company because they pay $15 an hour plus tips in California. Much of the rest of the country doesn't pay $15 to restaurant workers. So this CFO was saying, we're going to be fine because we pay 15 plus tips in California, and Denny's California is growing faster than Denny's anywhere else in the United States of America. Why, he said? Because when we pay our employees more, guess what they do? We find that they bring their families to eat at Denny's, and guest receipts go up and the company grows. And following that expose on the CFO of Denny's, there was a second article in Newsweek with the title, Denny's Shareholders Revolt. Denny's shareholders got together and told the company, if you are saying that raising the minimum wage has resulted in the growth of the company in California, you fighting wage increases is going against shareholder interests because shareholders care about growth and profit. And what the Denny's CFO was saying is that the company grows, does better, and produces more revenue when workers are paid better. He was admitting to something that we have known to be true for a very long time, which is that when you pay people enough to live, at least closer to the cost of living, they support the economy. They are able to do a better job in these jobs. They're able to focus on providing excellent food and service. There's not as much turnover, meaning they don't leave to find other jobs. So you end up being able to hone your craft and your skills, and you do better, and you get better food and service. Customers do better because they not only get better food and service, but they are experiencing workers being in the same place for a long time. They get to know people who work in a restaurant rather than seeing a different face every time they walk in. Everybody does better when workers do better. And that's what this proposition is all about.
Now, Saru, you seem very passionate about the restaurant workers. How did you get into working on this?
My parents are immigrants from India, and I, during law school, felt driven to support immigrant workers because I saw the struggles my parents faced as immigrants, my community faced as an immigrant community. And so I was organizing immigrant workers in New York City after law school when 9/11 happened. And on 9/11, there was a restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center, Tower 1. On that morning, 73 workers died in the restaurant. And I was asked as a young attorney to help those workers, the workers who had survived and the families of the victims. And what I learned when I met these workers and started organizing and supporting them was that the restaurant industry has been one of the largest and fastest growing private sector employers in the United States for decades, but it's been the absolute lowest paying employer for generations, dating all the way back to slavery when the wage structure in the industry was created and when the National Restaurant Association came on the scene and started arguing to keep wages inhumanely low. And so that history of slavery, of racial inequity, of gender inequity, and economic inequality, and frankly, corporate control of our democracy outrages me as the child of immigrants, outrages me as somebody who went to school, grew up in working class communities, because I know the value of people. People deserve to be paid and treated as the skilled professionals that they are. And frankly, every human being deserves to be treated and paid with dignity and respect.
Saru Jayaraman, it was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you for having me.
We would love to see a greater, broader, more robust discussion amongst policymakers, amongst labor, business, people on the left, people on the right, people in the middle. I believe in that kind of healthy discussion. I think we become very deeply divided, and it's very sad. People used to talk. There used to be a lot more discussion. Former Assembly Member Mike Roos, who you might know of the Mello Roos or the Roberti Roos Act, right? He's historic, but he's a very good moderate Democrat. I'm good friends with him. We work with him on pro-business issues, as do a number of other business groups. I mean, he talks about the days where, he and Republicans, they'd go to Frank Fat's, the nearby restaurant, Chinese restaurant in Sacramento, and they'd sit and they'd talk. And the first discussion would be, I don't like your bill and here's why. The second discussion after a little bit of a dumpling would be, I don't like your idea, but we can work on it. And I said, what would be after the third or fourth dumpling, and maybe one glass of wine, would be, do you need a co-author? But all joking aside, even aside from all of that, he said
That's amazing. So
people
over
would
one,
go and talk. And I think now, sadly, so much is deeply divided. And people are not having those discussions in the Capitol. But as I said, they're not suggesting those discussions with the people in our community. More public hearings, more stakeholder sessions. I think that we would all benefit if we brought more people in early and had ideas together that would really work well. You know, one experience that I remember is I was very fortunate to work with a real master, Governor Schwarzenegger, back in the early 2000s. As you know, I served as his Director of External Affairs. But one thing that we actually had to educate not just the governor, but ourselves, was when we were working with different stakeholder groups, how important it is to sit and take some time to talk to those stakeholder groups. He is such a master of working with people, and he does have a good heart and a good focus on people, but with his lifestyle always being on the go, right? Traveling the globe, doing things with bodybuilding, doing things with the movies. Even he realized that when you're in Sacramento talking to a group like Asian Americans or crime victims or local leaders about very important issues, he and we as his staff had to realize you can't just rush into that room, shake a hand, and walk out, take a couple pictures and leave, right? That you need to give that quality time. You need to dedicate that time. So I think a lesson that I learned even as staff from him was, take that time. We all need to slow down and talk. That's why we enjoy doing this with you. We move so busy and so fast and so aggressively, but we don't stop to talk. And I think when I was there working with him, he realized that we need to stop and take the time to really listen and learn and get information that flows up.
Did you have any moment where you had a change based on somebody's experience, where you were thinking a certain way and then you ended up shifting your views because you saw?
I would probably say it has evolved over the years here in my role at NFIB. For a number of years, I kind of wore the hat just as the state director, listening to small business owners, right? And listening to their problems and their issues. And then, several years ago, I also opened my own public affairs firm, Kabateck Strategies. I'm fortunate to wear both hats. But, I'm now that guy that wakes up at 5 in the morning thinking about payroll and did I already get things done? Did I get this taken care of for my customer? I think that evolved me a lot, was that I actually, walked the talk. Having my own small business, opening it up, getting an S-Corp going, and sympathizing with these 14,000 small business owners that we represent, that I'm not just a guy talking on their behalf, but what is it? I'm not just the hair club president, right? But so I live it. And I think understanding the highs of being a small business owner, but also the challenges. And I think that was a transformation for me that really helped.
John Kabateck, California State Director of NFIB. It was great to have you back on California Insider.
Always great to see you. Be sure to go to your local small business. Let's get some food. Let's have some fun. Let's create jobs by helping those neighborhood mom and pops.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
If you have stories in your community that you think is relevant to Californians, make sure to email me at siamak@californiainsider.com. It's again siamak@californiainsider.com. We love to cover your stories. Thank you.